We must reduce emissions to reverse climate change. We already know that. However, there are several effects that we'll have to deal with. Climate adaptation is all about anticipating and adjusting to the effects of climate change. And today, we're going to hear from experts, activists, and a great team of speakers about how to cope with climate change. So welcome everyone to the Resilience and Adaptation session. We couldn't do this without the support of our funders, donors, and contributors, as you see now on screen. And there we go. And partners such as eco-interpreters who are currently translating our voices right now. So thank you very much to all of those who made this possible. My name is Carlos Shanka. I'm a young climate advocate from the Canary Islands, Spain. I went to study biology at the University of Bristol, and I'm currently back in the archipelago to cope with, among others, with climate change. So today's session is especially relevant and interesting to me. I'll pass it on to Alexis. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Carlos. I'm really excited to be here with everyone and excited to learn about adaptation and resilience. So my name is Alexis McGivern, and I work for an interdisciplinary research group at the University of Oxford called Oxford Net Zero. And we work to ensure that people making net zero commitments do so with integrity, and we also track those commitments. And please note that this session is being interpreted in several different languages. So if you've previously requested this, you will be on the Zoom channel. And if you're watching in English today, you will be on the YouTube Live. We will also today have speakers who will be speaking in Spanish. So you will be, if you're watching on the YouTube Live, don't worry, it will be interpreted into English for you live. So I know that you have seen this a few times already, but we just wanted to re-emphasize our rules of engagement for these sessions. Most importantly is just to treat each other with respect, to ensure that we're speaking with respect when we're speaking in the Zoom chat or in the YouTube live chat, that we're paying attention to our speakers, and also that we're making an effort to attend the sessions or to watch the recordings afterwards.
Lovely, thank you so much. As usual, we have a great range of speakers and activities down the line, so we'll see you in a bit. We'll hear from Joyce Mendez, from her youth testimony, Dr. Pilar Bueno, our community space and activities, a short break followed by resilient speakers, youth-led initiatives, and Dr. Chukwumerije Okerike. So, as usual, as well, we are going to show you the Mentimeter, this Michael platform in which you can share our thoughts. Please log into menti.com with our code 33562398. And today we're excited to hear about your personal experience of climate news in your continent, your country, even in your city or hometown. We're very curious to see what we can gather out of here. In the Canary Islands, for example, we just had elections last weekend, which will determine the further climate policies for the next year. So we're very, very, very pendant and curious, let's say, to see what goes on. Let's take a look at the answers that we get.
So if you didn't manage to copy the code, it's just at the top of the screen right now, so you can check it out there.
Oh, wow, that was quick. And if you can add the place that you are writing from, like the continent, your city, that would be great, so we have more context. Water crisis, net zero week, where? Drought, okay. Wildfires across Canada. You know about that one, actually. Okay, floods in Italy, more droughts, more floods. We have some Italians watching apparently. Yeah, wildfires in Atlantic Canada, high temperatures. Elections in Spain. Yeah, there we go. It's been very heated currently, and floods on top of that. Yeah, I'm glad that we're doing this session today because we have a lot to deal with. As we can see, coastal erosion, we have this in the Canary Islands as well, and sea level rise. It's just there, water crisis, water shortage in Barcelona, politics in the UK. Whoa, so I'm very quick. All right, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much for those news. We'll check them later. And back to Alexis.
Thanks so much. Let me just share my screen so we can introduce our amazing speaker. First of all, though, we just wanted to share some learning objectives for the session. So let me just, we have some learning objectives for the session. So the first thing is that we're going to be looking at adaptation and resilience today. So we're going to be talking about terms of adaptations, demystifying some of the very complicated language that comes around adaptation. So we're going to be talking about gradual adaptation, about transformative adaptation, and also, of course, the limits to adaptation. This is following on from our session last week on last session on loss and damage, where we talked about sort of what happens when we go beyond our ability to adapt. We're also going to talk about adaptation and its place within the UNFCCC and, of course, within the Paris Agreement. Our expert speakers will also be demystifying some terms and some big things that were coming up before COP28, like the global stocktake, the GGA, the Global Goal on Adaptation, and national adaptation plans. And we're also going to be discussing adaptation funding, which, as we know, is far outstripped by mitigation funding. So we have this attendance form, so you guys can scan the QR code. We'll also be sharing it in the Zoom and YouTube chat. Don't worry about getting this done. You have until the 7th of June. So if you wanted to watch the recording, or for the many people who, due to time zone constraints, are going to be watching this recorded rather than live, you have 1 week to watch the recording and to submit your attendance form. So you have lots of opportunities to do that there. And just a reminder that last week, we know some people had some troubles because we uploaded the translated versions a little bit later because we had some staff members on leave. So we fully understand that. And if you had any issues with that, please don't hesitate to contact us by email and we'll sort your attendance for last week. So I'll hand it back to you, Carlos.
Great, thank you. And as you can see, we're loaded with content and things to learn today. And what better to hear from Joyce? What can I tell about our fellow young climate leader here? Joyce Mendez is a migrant and social entrepreneur working on transboundary cooperation in the water, energy, food nexus with emphasis on energy justice. Joyce is a major voice of Latin America within leading youth and climate mechanisms, including the United Nations Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, the United Nations SDG7 Youth Constituency, and the IRENA's Director General's Global Council on Enabling Youth Action for SDG7. Not to talk about the Youth for Climate. Many things going on here, especially related to energy. And currently, she's working as a climate change consultant in UNICEF Paraguay, fostering youth advocacy in national climate policies. Bienvenida, Joyce, welcome. I'm personally really glad to see you today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna give you a sweet introduction in the sweet language of Guarani. I'll say in English later. So, Aisha pa Cherera Joyce, che Aime Paraguay pe, Amabapo, Adaptación Climática and Dive. So, hello everybody, this is Joyce Mendez. I live in Paraguay. I work with climate adaptation in the region, and I want to present you a case that we had with kind of youth organizations in the region. So I don't know if you can maybe show my presentation, please. That would be great. Or should I share the screen? I think Jen is gonna show it.
Maybe
and
just...
yeah, I can show it.
I can do it as well.
Just, it's up to you if maybe allow me to share the screen.
Here it is.
Perfect. Okay, so I think you need to perhaps, yeah, there it goes. So unfortunately, I'm not perhaps starting this presentation with the great news. I grew up in the border of Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina, and yesterday we had news from Brazil, and actually it was approved. One of these, like the chamber approved the invasion of indigenous lands and indigenous communities through it's called the PL 490, or it's like a law project that looks forward occupying indigenous lands for deforestation and mining without recognizing the tenure of those lands before 1988, right? So I think that most of kind of the youth from kind of Brazil or even kind of the border as well, we realize there are fights that perhaps we don't have right now the influence in the government, but there are some fights that we can do locally. And I'm going to present you, I would say, a successful case about this. So maybe if you go to next slide, you will see more or less where I'm located or where I grew up and where this project was born. So basically, as we see, climate change doesn't have borders, right? So whenever we talk about like climate adaptation, we need to think in a transboundary logic. So this project was born in the triple border city, which was the city of Ciudad del Este, Paraguay, Foz de Iguaçu, the Brazilian side, and Puerto Iguaçu, the Argentinian side. Next, please. So we realized, like as I thought, the youth, we realized that there were not enough data about climate adaptation. So if we didn't have data, we didn't have an opportunity to create public policies. And so inside the Latin American University for Federal Integration, UNILA, we decided to create an observatory for the triple border to tackle environmental education and climate adaptation, which is called the Observatorio Educador Moema Vieser, which was named after one of a great leader in Brazil, and she was nominated to the Nobel Prize because her work on collective intelligence. So we work mainly with migrant and refugee youth that come to Brazil to study. So what we were proposing is like how we can have youth as researchers, but also youth, they know their territories, and they, you know, like we have different ways to talk to the community. So we created this organization, and we talk about having a triple border process to integrate climate adaptation policies. Our main concern in the region, next please, is the Atlantic forest. So the Atlantic forest in Brazil holds around 70% of the population of the country. It's such a vast biome, and it's in danger. So we create a project that it was called Encontros y Caminos, or like a meeting and, you know, to find pathways together in the city of Foz de Iguaçu in the Brazilian side. Next, please. Using the methodology of social participation or social participatory methodologies like social cartography and information that you cannot find in Google Maps, let's say. It's information that is in people's knowledge, people's perspectives. So we wanted to rebuild a map in the last around 60 to 50 years of the city. Next, please. In the city and the transboundary area, to see how we could join actually the local forest into the national frameworks in Brazil. Because I don't know if you have heard about the Iguazu Falls. The Iguazu Falls are protected by UNESCO, but the park that is, you know, that holds the falls is not. And in the Argentinian side is protected, but it wasn't in the Brazilian side, like the city we were located at. So what we got is to do a full process of social cartography of these spoken maps, or mapas falados in Portuguese. And we gathered the community, next please, in order to have enough data for us to have it as an input to create a public policy that protects the Mata Atlântica, or the Atlantic forest in our region. So we did it. I mean, it was a full, almost like 2-3 years process. Still, we're doing mapping activities in order to also have it protected, and we counted with partners as well, nationally and internationally, for this initiative. Next, please. So basically, we also got to register a little bit of our actions. We had a publication and we were working with the University of Leeds as well about the different frameworks, the formal and informal frameworks. And we also had a project that was called Triangle City Cooperation, again, where youth play the main role as not just translating, but communicating, going to territories, getting the data, but also doing the full process of lobbying, advocacy, and, you know, being creative in the moment as well, talking to the policymakers and to the community in general. So you can access to this publication through this QR code. Next, please. And I just want to also say that during the process, we realized that, like, okay, we can protect this part of the forest, we can establish mechanisms to communicate with the 3 different countries in case of a specific climate emergency, which is like water crisis, our main issue at the moment as well. However, education is just a fundamental aspect for us to guarantee the sustainability of our projects. So we decided to use the same data as well to start creating the local environmental education policy. So we have done a book about it. It is in Portuguese, unfortunately, it's not yet in English. I will be sharing the link as well with the slides, where we comment and we go how we divide the city in basins, and we were mapping what we found and how these inputs can be translated into a policy instrument. Next, please. Yeah, well, that was pretty much what I wanted to comment and share with you. This is our organization Instagram. You can follow us there. We are doing a lot of activities. We have started to share more materials, see how to do community mobilization for youth-led local adaptation. And we want to share these experiences, but also we want to learn from other youth from around the world, where actually the policy and the policies will not get to certain territories, but we need to act and defend our territories. So, muito obrigada. Argullevete, muchas gracias for this space.
Thank you so much, Joyce. That's absolutely amazing and so cool to see you guys doing so much amazing activity to preserve your homeland. So thank you so much for sharing with us. So I'm just going to move now to introduce our first expert speaker of the day. I hope you can see my screen. So we're going to be using Mentimeter through Pilar's presentation in order to ask questions. So we're really, really lucky to have today someone who has a massive insider look on the inside of the UNFCCC and also on what it looks like to work on adaptation from the government side. So Dr. Pilar Bueno is a senior researcher at the National Council of Scientific and Technical Research, CONICET of Argentina. She's a member of the UNFCCC Adaptation Committee from 2017 all the way through to 2021. And she was also the former co-chair from 2018 to 2019. She also has experience working inside the government in Argentina as the former Secretary of Climate Change of the country from 2019 to 2020. She's now, similar to me in academia, a professor at the National University of Rosario in Argentina, and she works on climate change and adaptation, including many projects like Project Argentina 1.5 Degrees, works in the Center of Studies in Environmental Policies at the National University of Rosario, and also works at the Department of Environment and Development at the National University of La Plata. So we're so lucky to have her here today. Thank you so much, Pilar, for taking the time to speak with us. And Pilar will be making her intervention in Spanish, and there will be live interpretation into English. So with that, I'll hand off to you, Pilar.
Thank you very much, Alexis. Muchas gracias. Gracias por la invitación.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your invitation. I feel very honored to be here with all of you. This invitation to this discussion, for me, was a source of great pleasure. I see it as an opportunity to address the different challenges that we are facing in terms of climate science and policy making, the two aspects around which my work has revolved. As a researcher at the national and international level in social sciences, and also at the international level, I have been doing a lot. I have been involved in decision-making processes. So I would like to share some of my experiences in that regard. The first topic that I would like to cover is the recognition of adaptation from a political perspective. We will be focusing on the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change during this presentation. This is the result of a discussion that from the very beginning was marginalized from a political perspective. There are different interpretations as far as the objective of the convention is concerned, but I always like to start this type of discussions focusing on food security and economic development. I think that all these components are key to achieving the objective of the convention, and all these components are in the end what we see in the Paris Agreement in Article number 2. We can see here some milestone. I don't think it's necessary to see all of this, but it is helpful. For more than 25 years in the framework of this convention, unfortunately, goals are not always achieved in terms of mitigation. We are still discussing how to achieve political goals and make appropriate decisions. So this slide has aims to mention some of the milestones in terms of adaptation that have been achieved under the UNFCCC. For example, the recognition at COP2 of reporting instruments created by the convention. National communication and adaptation is reflected in this from the very beginning. I think this pretty much closes the circle of instruments that we can use to analyze adaptation. We will cover that in a few more minutes. We will go into more detail. I think it is also of paramount importance to mention from an institutional perspective the creation of the first funds and the first tools during COP7 and also NAPAs in developing countries, of course. This is indeed a milestone that translated into something else during the Cancun conference in 2010. We were able to see the creation of the Adaptation Committee, which is a technical assistance body that assists, if I may say so again, different parties in their adaptation processes. This is not only a document, but also a process that was established thanks to this framework. The Green Fund was also created, and this all in all translates into guidelines for climate funding. So this is indeed a major historical milestone. In addition to these components, there is the Nairobi work program that plays an essential role in terms of capacity building and multi-sector actions. This framework has helped us bridge gaps in different sectors. And now the Paris Agreement, of course, I would like to devote a few minutes to the Paris Agreement. Maybe with this, well, this slide, of course, is not really thorough, extremely thorough, but it offers an overview on the different ideas that were included in the different articles of the Paris Agreement. We can see here some examples. The objective, of course, adaptation is a main component of the objective. Now the full scope in Article 3, NDCs, adaptation communication in Article 1711, which is, of course, another means to achieve our adaptation goals in accordance with the Paris Agreement. This is a political precedent of great importance. We held the discussions in Lima And also in Paris, we discussed the need for a concept, a more thorough analysis, and the integration of adaptation in all of our activities. We were not able to achieve this from a political perspective, but all developing countries, Mexico specifically in February 2015, included different articles related to adaptation. And for this, it wasn't really necessary to make additional decisions. So, of course, this is a key milestone that translated into the full scope that we are using nowadays. So this is not, as far as action is concerned, we're not only focusing on adaptation and mitigation, but also in the means of implementation, financing, technology, capacity building. In the Paris Agreement, we can also find Article number 7. Article number 7 is the main components because it is entirely and utterly devoted to adaptation. We can find a lot of information here. So the GGA was established, the Global Adaptation Goal. We will discuss that into more detail in a few seconds. The adaptation efforts by developing countries is also, this topic is also mentioned in Article number 7. Now, the global stocktake is another main component of Article 7. It is also enshrined in Article 7, paragraph 14. The institutionalization of the process of the implementation of national plans, communication adaptation. In a 3-year process, during this negotiation process in Poland, we were able to come up with additional guidelines on adaptation. And thanks to all of this, nowadays, we have more than 50 adaptation communications in accordance with a convention, and this has translated into very interesting discussions and reports. All these components make up a very interesting approach to adaptation in developing countries, but it also touches upon the priorities, the different planning activities that have been carried out. We also see here means of implementation, of course, the different mechanisms, financing, the transparency framework, and reporting. We can see here reports, of course. Reports are of paramount importance in all these processes. That's why the transparency framework was created. We also have a technical expert review. So the reports are subjected to review as well. So this is indeed a multilateral process in which different actors are involved.
De la adaptación, disculpen, a lo largo de todo el acuerdo.
So throughout the agreement, we see these objectives to support national and collective commitments as embedded in the Paris Agreement. This slide informs about some of the discussions that are there in the public eye when it comes to adaptation. So they are all interlinked and related. The first one, which is key to me because it articulates the rest of them, is the adaptation policy cycle. For many time now, we have understood that the convention made a lot of progress. Let me just come back to the previous slide. So countries at the local and international level have understood the policy cycle that you can see on the screen when it comes to assessments, implementation, and planification, and as well as monitoring and assessment. Although we had these clear dynamics, sometimes this cycle is not pasted in other processes in the convention. So with the global goal adaptation, this is changing, and I think this is good news. So it's important to understand and recognize this is an image from one of the reports of UNEP. It's important to see that planification has made progress, significant progress. There's around 84% of growth, and I think this is important to highlight, but there are still some gaps, different gaps. This is one of those gaps. It is linked with the fact that although there is a great communication and reporting from developing countries on adaptation and better tools to implement the agreement, there's still not a link between societies and the commitments in NDCs and NAPs. So these needs have to be funded, and there's a gap there too. And that is also reflected on the official information that we have on climate funding. Adaptation has received more growth. This is included in other bodies, in the convention, in other reports from other bodies. So adaptation is still lagging behind. We see an increase for climate funding to adaptation from 21 to 28%, but in here below we can see a decrease. So in multilateral funds, we see a decrease. For example, there are many other tools such as MDBs, and we see that it is still updated when it comes to grants and loans. So most of the climate finance on adaptation coming from NDBs still create debts for our developing countries. So the funding gap on adaptation is still big, and it is a cross-sectoral topic which has to be included in the policy cycle at a national and international level. It's an important topic that is going to come up many, many times, regardless of the topic that we are dealing with. So as IPCC has mentioned, there are problems to access to finance. There is a lack of specific funding too. These two are obstacles for the implementation on adaptation. There are different estimations on the finance gap coming from the adaptation gap reports, but there are much more figures to bear in mind. So this report explains that when we compare costs today, costs of adaptations with international adaptation finance flows, we see a big gap from 5 to 10%. Coming back to these dynamics, we see that the policy cycle is crucial to understand the process. I'd like to remember the BTRs, biennial transparency reports, and how they are embedded in this cycle. Next year, these biennial transparency reports will be submitted, so there will be an opportunity for our countries to inform about the content of those reports. This shouldn't be a burden, so it is important that this policy cycle is strong with adaptation-related documents and national adaptation plans, whether they are adaptation communications or other types of documents, NDCs or LTS. All these processes somehow have to be linked to that national adaptation plan, to that iterative policy cycle so that countries can build and strengthen our national processes on adaptation, working together with other partners and stakeholders. There's no doubt that this is the biggest strategy, the biggest element that is going to enable us to submit clear national plans that can receive the funding tools. That way we can strengthen policy cycles on data, on database to enhance capacity building. But as I say, in order to achieve this goal and to prevent our countries to get lost in the drafting of these documents, we do need to release, to make it easier for them. This is just a table, an information table that summarizes what we need. Here we can see different topics for these, the documents I was mentioning before. So we can see that there are different topics that will include some information. It's important to mention that this is an extra burden sometimes because some pieces of information here are doubled and repeated. So it is important to see an articulation between the different documents because some topics overlap. So that story that each country has to develop at a national level has to avoid the overlapping of different topics so that the reporting and communication systems can be easily used and adapted to the needs so that they become an opportunity and not a burden. And countries have to do that when they work on the global stocktake or in their national reporting systems. One of the key elements is, of course, the global stocktake. As I was saying before, it has a full scope. It was also a milestone that we have to highlight. It's going to enable us, once concluded this year, we are already finishing the first cycle, it's going to enable us to understand and create recommendations for the adjustment of ambitions. I'm not talking only about mitigation, but also about adaptation and means of implementation for climate action and justice. So in this process of consideration of outputs, there are different elements that are still open and are not clear yet. When it comes to adaptation, there are several points included in the agreement on the adaptation efforts of developing countries, how they have to review the adequacy and effectiveness of adaptation action and support, how it is needed to enhance the implementation of adaptation action, and the enhancement of the communication processes. So there are not so many tools that are already defined in the Paris agreements. So this was the case before when it comes to technology. When it comes to adaptation, we already had that information, but we still had many questions about what is going to happen with the results, with the outputs. As you may probably know, we still don't know if the outputs are going to be compiled in a decision, in a document, or both things. But it is still needed that we take stock of all the components. It is not still clear what the relation between aid and support is going to be. So there are still many things to clarify and many debates take place in independent areas. So the quantitative goal for the next year will have to be discussed. Apologies for from the English booth. Looks like we are not receiving a good quality of sound. It is not clear either if there's going to be a parallel adaptation framework or not. A review on the progress to achieve the global goal on adaptation was not possible until this moment because we didn't have enough time to understand how we could contribute to the global goal. So we didn't really had enough time to understand how we could contribute to the goal. So it is important to understand this because it is important that we have a balanced goal. So the global goal on adaptation is already established, as I was saying before, in the Paris Agreement. So it's nothing new. It was already included in the Paris Agreement. This is important to mention because I hear this many times and it's an error. So in the Paris Agreement, we see that there are three components which are very clear through the IPCC2. We have a working program established in Glasgow, drafted by the Adaptation Committee. I'd like to invite you to have a look at it and read it because it's very interesting for the technical and political debate. Here you can see the opportunities and the challenges as well, the methodological, political, and conceptual challenges. We have different challenges, and we have also a lot of ambition to create indicators, metrics, and specific goals and targets within our work. We need a top-down approach and also a bottom-up approach from the countries, but we can also use mixed systems. And I'd like to give further details on this. Last year and this year, we've been working on different workshops. Last year we had 4. This year we'll have some more this weekend. For example, we have one. So in one of the decisions, all this information is included. The decision also mentions the scope of Article 7.14. So we can see there that we are not meeting the work included in the decision. It's not happening either at the decision-making level, and I think that's a key component. We are reaching the end of the presentation, and I'd like to say that last year in Sharm el-Sheikh, the decision included the start of the development of a framework for the global goal on adaptation. This framework has different components that are included here. I'm talking about dimensions that are linked with the political cycle on adaptation. This is important to understand how we negotiate it. We are looking for that collective thinking so that the developing countries don't have to face that constant extra burden. So that dialogue has to be institutionalized, formalized, and included in all instances. At the same time, there are different topics linked to IPCC. On ecosystems, for example, it is included in the table. I've put it in a table, but everything is included in the decision. There are also a mention of cross-sectoral approaches, which I think that's very important. And I think that at the national level, this is included, but not in the international level. And we still need to focus on that. There's also a mention to the global stocktake, and there are also some thorny issues, the goals, indicators, and possible approaches. We already have some proposals in the submissions. Proposals are more top-down approaches and are based on the policy cycle for support. It's something reduced, but very strong at the same time. It is focused on the process, but also on the outcomes. There are also some approaches that are top-down, meaning that the countries will have to inform on the progress. And we also have mixed systems that propose to nourish from different instances and use the framework as a way to use both systems. We also have the opportunity to continue strengthening some of the elements of the framework through enabling conditions. So all the discussion on how to establish a link with the reporting and assessment. Many countries, developing countries above all, mention the need to take stock of the action and support components. To finish with my presentation, I'd like to mention again these 4 components. I'd like to say that this is a reduced picture, and we have to understand funding as a cross-sectoral component for national and collective action. It is a huge opportunity within the international process to see a confluence of all these components in the policy cycle. So that policy cycle has to be the place where these components are linked and included at the same time, so that we can think in a collective way. We also have to understand how this is linked to all the report system, to all the documents we saw before, and how collective dynamics in the GST and GGA do not finish in 2023. We are already working beyond that. This is a period of learning to understand how we can develop a framework on the GGA that's good work for the next second and third cycles, so that we can fulfill the requirements of the Article 7.14. I'd like to leave it here for the time being. I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you, Pilar, for your intervention. I'll continue speaking in Spanish. We have 2 questions for you. I'm going to ask them both at the same time. Then you can answer them. Shall I start? Okay. So the first question is, what are the specific measures that you recommend to youth so that they can get involved in adaptation on climate change and actively participate in climate negotiations? That's the first question. And the second question is, how do you think that youth can make influence in the adaptation agenda, especially in the South, in the global South, and in the Middle East?
Bueno, muchas gracias por las preguntas. En primer lugar,
thank you for the questions. First of all, regarding the participation processes, I'd like to say that negotiations in the framework of the convention have a access barrier, not only for young people, but all stakeholders in general, or stakeholders that participate there. These barriers are linked to the general dynamics of the process. So it's a pretty technical negotiation, and sometimes it's difficult to access there because there are also problems within the participation inside those technical negotiations. There's also a lack of clear organization between the parties. Would you like me to switch to English? No, we are talking now in the Spanish channel, so you can carry on in Spanish. Okay, sorry. As I was saying, these access barriers have to be overcome. We have to work to overcome them. We believe that everybody should be at the negotiation table. And at the same time, access rules have to be clear. However, due to the current situation, we are not going to be able to change them for COP28. So how can we then participate there? So my specific suggestion is that you focus on one topic. Don't try to cover 50 of them at the same time. It's going to be extremely difficult and you're not going to achieve that. So it's better to just focus on one topic, study a lot, and understand the historic dynamics and the current dynamics. When it comes to adaptation and other topics, I've tried to give you some tips on that. When it comes to GGA, we are going to include it in our agenda for all of you interested to follow that specific item. We also have this weekend's workshop, which takes place on Sunday and Monday. There are other debates, like the ones linked to the GST. There's also the end of the technical dialogues on adaptation. As organizations and youth leaders, you can also communicate the concerns on the fragmentation of the agendas. That's, for me, a constant debate. So adaptation lags behind in the outcomes, and we want to analyze the outcomes due to the current urgency. So it's important that we all send the same message, that we have to debate on action and support in all rooms, and that all stakeholders have access to those rooms. So I truly believe that there is a common message that we can send. Also, I'd like to invite you to get in contact with me if you're going to Bonn for the COP28 as well. So it will be a pleasure to have a coffee with you, to talk with you, to exchange ideas, anything you'd like. It will be a pleasure for me to do that. So through the organization, you'll receive my contact details and I'll be there for you. I'd also recommend you to get to the countries and to the groups. If you haven't done that, that's a good idea, just to try to informally speak with the groups. I've done that with the groups in Latin America. So it's always a pleasure to work as well as a link for that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pilar, for your recommendations and for your presentation. We are going to send your contact details in our follow-up email tomorrow. Thank you very much for your time and for all the work you're doing. Thank you.
We'll switch back to English now, and I'll pass it on to Carlos to continue. Thank you, Pilar.
Thank you so much indeed. I personally took many notes, and yes, I wish that we were better connected and we were widely accepted into this session. And that's why we've created a community space together. So you can join us on Slack. We can host thousands of people there, and especially relevant for those regions that you are part of. We've separated different channels for different regions. We'll be sending the link here on Zoom and on the YouTube chat right now, as well as a follow-up email in case you miss it today. So come and check out our community on Slack, and we're looking forward to seeing you introducing yourself for the moment.
Thanks, Carlos. So we're also very excited to announce a partnership with an amazing organization called Terra.Do. So Terra is the largest climate training platform in the world, and they have a mission to get 100 million people working in climate by the end of this decade. So they've got a deadline and they're working towards it. So Terra is the massive climate jobs platform, but it's also a learning community. And so we've actually partnered up with them so that people will have access to the Terra classes and as well as our training. So you'll be able to get loads of training from Terra as well as ourselves. So over the next week or the next 10 days, you'll receive an email directly from Terra with a login. And you'll be able to log in and you'll be able to see a schedule for the remaining sessions. You'll also be able to see all of these lectures that are grouped largely under the themes that we've been going with as well. See some more course information. You can take notes, and it also gives you access to their platform. So you'll be able to look at certain job descriptions there. So we hope that this is a partnership that will be useful to you all, so you can get lots more content. And we're really excited to be working with the folks at Terra on this. They've been amazing. So just before we close off for our break, we have an optional bonus activity and a bit of homework if you'd like it, which is a collaboration with a group called Talk Climate Change. So this is actually a project that I set up before COP26. And the idea was that we have done a lot of research in the academic space about what the best way to educate people about climate change is. And actually, one of the best ways is relational conversation. So instead of people looking at a lecture of someone that they've never met before, you actually learn best from your brother, from your sister, from your teacher, you know, these kind of people that are in your life in a more present way. So ahead of COP26, we set up this platform to encourage people to have meaningful conversations about climate change and educate the people around them. And we asked people to have a conversation and then log it on our platform. So you can see we have little dots all over the world that each of those represents a conversation that somebody had. And we've made a campaign tag specifically for the youth climate training. So if you go to the bottom there, when you have a conversation, you can submit it on the platform and select youth climate training, and then we'll have a beautiful map of all the conversations that you're all having around the world. So that's your homework between now and next session. You have 2 weeks to pick someone you know, have a conversation with them about what you learned in this lecture from our amazing experts, from our amazing activists, and we look forward to seeing what interventions you have on the map. Now, without further ado, we'll take a little break of 5 minutes. So go outside, look at the sun, and I hope it's sunny where you are. If not, maybe look at the rain or the darkness, but get some fresh air, and you can come back in 5 minutes and we'll continue with our next intervention.
We'll see you in a bit.
달려 내일은 더 빛나지 당연 yeah. 내 삶은 shine like a diamond 괜히 해서 뭐해 걱정 I got no worries no I got no worries no I got no worries no I'm shining like a diamond yeah got different view 여유롭게 tease yeah yeah 내 자유로운 soul leave me be please 문제가 돈이라면 I'll be filthy rich but 걱정 따윈 없지 not it is 내밀어 따위는 너 언제나 보이는 건 no no 속도로 내야 돼 pedal to the metal yeah I don't really care just move out of my way Reaching for the stars, always on the right road 사실 어떤 길이라도 그게 상관없지 Finna make it work 늦더라도 golden 삶은 마치 rolling 당층까지 rolling I put on down, give them all, give them 100 I got a lot on my mind 아직은 나 힘이 들어도 I'm grinding yeah Yeah 나는 나이 싫지 않아 목소리 내야 해 목소리 내야 돼 더 Got a different view 여유롭게 달려 I got no worries, no. I got no worries, no. I got no worries, no.
Hello again, friends. Dear tribe, family, how you doing? It's good to be here again. What an honor to share this a space with such wonderful guests. Oh my God, that was amazing. Pilar, Joyce, we couldn't have a better session. Thank you so much for existing. All right, so before I come to the next guests and give the floor to them, I have a few words to say. So we indeed are facing a really big challenge here. So by the year 2030, as you may know, it's estimated that over 4 billion people of this planet will be facing the harsh realities of climate change effects. And this isn't something to take lightly, folks. Time is running out and we need to rally ourselves and build resilience within our communities quickly and effectively, work together because we have the power to shape policies that reflects our real needs. We know what our community needs. We know what we need to do. We just need to work together, align the resources, launch vital adaptation projects, and keep an eye on monitoring and keep the adaptation cycle going. At the same time, we need to learn how to respond efficiently to extreme weather events. It's not just about climate change, it's about saving lives. So as you may know, we, the youth, are not just spectators. We are definitely part of the solution. And therefore, we want to showcase all the action that we guys are doing all around the world, because we know that we don't have time. We need to work together, and therefore we need to share what we have learned for other youngsters to jump in the same path and do as quickly as they can the action that is needed in their communities. So we partner with the Young Adaptation Working Group to gather best practices for national adaptation plans so we can have efficient, effective, and significant participation in the design of these plans that will definitely ultimately save our lives and promote youth-led adaptation. We definitely have a great impact, and we need to work together to consolidate that data on how much we're doing so we can access more resources, more access to climate finance, and the recognition that we're needed to also incentivize our work. Because we also study, we have to care about our family and work and millions of other stuff. Also, we need to live our younghoods. So we need the right incentives put in place in universities, the state, and so on. So I invite you to, if you know best practices, if you participated, or you have youth-led adaptation projects that you're doing on ground, or you have friends, please help us fill this form. We will drop it in the link afterwards. But now let's go to our amazing speakers. So in this session, we're gonna know a little bit of Race to Resilience, which is a campaign of the high-level climate champions. And we got two youngsters here that participate at the expert technical level, and they're definitely here to show what they're doing and why is this so important. So first, we're going to introduce Francis Mason, which is the metrics lead in the Center of Climate and Resilience Research, and also works at the Climate Champions team. Francis is a researcher. He holds a master's degree in sociology from Alberto Hurtado University, based in where I live, in Santiago, where he also earned his degree in sociology. In addition, he has completed postgraduate studies in Chinese studies from Universidad de Chile and received training as permaculture designer from El Malsano in Chile. So, Francis, the floor is yours. Oh, okay. We got he's gonna be a little bit late, some technical problems, so but you excuse me, friends. So I'm going to introduce Juan Carlo Varela, a friend of mine that I met at the NAP Expo this year. And he holds a bachelor degree in sociology as well, and pursuing a master's degree in system analysis applied to society in the University of Chile, focusing on investigating ways to increase climate resilience. So please, Juan, amigo mío, adelante.
My friend, we give you the floor. Thank you very much. I will take the floor in Spanish, if you don't mind, and I would like to apologize on behalf of Francis. He's having some schedule issues. So basically, I will be doing this presentation. I would like to share my screen, if you don't mind. Can someone please help me? Can you all see my screen? Okay, wonderful. Welcome to everybody. I will be doing a presentation on the Race to Resilience campaign. I will be telling you what we do as youth for resilience. I will be discussing our framework, the framework that we use to assess resilience. I am Juan Carlo Varela. I am a metrics analyst. I am part of the technical team. And these are some of the aspects that I'll be presenting during my intervention. I will cover the concept of resilience. Secondly, I will explain to you what this campaign is about, Race to Resilience. Thirdly, I will mention some of the partners that contribute to this campaign. And finally, the framework we use in all our activities. First of all, resilience. What is resilience? There are different definitions of resilience that vary tremendously on how this concept is understood, on what aspects are taken into consideration to define resilience. It is also related to other concepts such as vulnerability, risks, etc. This means that the concept of resilience is rather complex. It is also flexible, variable. It could be, its meaning can be adapted depending on how it's used. But at least in the context of climate communication and the Race to Resilience campaign, we have decided to adopt the official definition of resilience, which was proposed by climate change experts. The IPCC definition. It is one of the most complete definitions, the most systemic definitions that exist in our opinion. And it defines resilience as the capacity of different systems to cope with the different threats and risks associated with climate change in such a way that an identity and structure can be maintained, all while maintaining capacity building activities. This means that resilience has two main characteristics that are also complementary. First of all, the capacity to absorb external shocks. That means a capacity to recover, a capacity to face negative consequences in such a way that the impact is not as strong, and the ability to recover, to go back to normal, if you will. So that's the recovery capacity or a coping capacity. On the other hand, we have the adaptation capacity, which can be understood as a combination of two processes. First of all, the capacity to learn. That is the capacity to learn from previous experiences, from previous milestones and previous mistakes as well. And the process of developing responses and the capacity, the ability to anticipate future challenges. Challenges, indeed, is a combination of these two capacities that can be reflected in different aspects. And as I said before, they are complementary, they complement each other. Well, as we can see here, this concept is very complex. Resilience has been defined in several ways throughout history, but Holly is a psychologist from the 1970s that defined resilience in adaptive complex systems, and he defines resilience as the capacity to absorb change and remain stable. Now, Folke, another researcher, talked about resilience in social ecological systems, and he added additional characteristics: the capacity to respond, the capacity to absorb, and also the capacity to create knowledge. And then in the 2000s, the year 2000 and 2010, resilience was defined not only as part of a system, but also it was understood as a planning process within institutions, that is, as part of public policy. So resilience can be understood as part of a system and as a means to study systems, but also as a possibility to increase resilience within institutions. That said, I am moving on to the Race to Resilience campaign. This campaign aims to increase resilience in different systems by catalyzing, that is, by accelerating the increase of resilience within systems as part of public policy. So this was said before already, 4 billion people will be at severe risk of climate change. They are already facing the negative impacts of climate change in different parts of the world. In the face of this, the global community, the international community, has been focusing on mitigation on the one hand, the net zero campaign, of course, which as you know means making efforts to reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases. And on the other hand, the increase of resilience. And we, the youth, can be agents of change to increase resilience. This is a global campaign, of course, that aims to deliver a step change in global ambition for climate resilience, putting people and nature first in the pursuit of a resilient world And by 2030, we plan to catalyze action by non-state actors that builds the resilience of 4 billion people from groups and communities who are vulnerable. Our vision by 2050 is to live in a world where all communities, all systems, where people live, are capable of facing the multiple risks posed by climate change. Our history, the campaign was launched in January 2021 after COP26. And this is a campaign, a sister campaign of other initiatives. Since its launching, the campaign has 36 initiatives led by our partners, and more than 1,700 partners, members of different associations, have contributed to this campaign. We have also devised a framework, a theoretical framework, which we use to assess the efficiency of resilience and the different commitments or pledges by different parties. We have been able to reach 2 billion people. Now, who are our partners? Well, we can see them on the screen. We can see here a list of the different partners that have contributed to this campaign. And the idea of having these partners is to generate increased resilience. But not only that, we take into account different variables. We have divided these partners in two big groups. One of them is what we call the group of operators, partners that operate direct resilience actions, look for resilience initiatives, and they cooperate directly with people. And then other additional partners. What does that mean? These partners establish alliances, partnerships with other actors. They communicate with other actors in the governance systems so as to increase resilience. So these partners not only engage in direct activities, but they also collaborate with other actors and communicate with them, with other actors that are unaware of what resilience entails. So they communicate with these actors, thus thereby generating more resilience. We have coverage in different countries all over the world, in 175 countries to be more specific. This is something we are proud about, of course, especially thanks to initiatives in India and other countries, other vulnerable countries, where more efforts need to be made. Indeed, we have also been using a data explorer that allows us to explore initiatives. We can filter, we can conduct searches by country, by region. Anyone can discover, can explore thanks to this tool, who are our partners, what their resilience techniques are. You can go into the website, which is rtr.dataexplorer.streamlit.app. You can also search the website on Google, and you only need to click on the first option that pops up. I can also give you, put the link on the chat box, and that way you can discover what Data Explorer is. So now let's move on to the framework. Well, the framework, the theoretical framework, is of paramount importance because, as I said before, resilience is a heterogeneous complex concept. Thus, we need to find a way to standardize resilience. So in the framework of this campaign, we use this. We have a pledge, a commitment, we ask our partners to conduct a risk assessment. Then they need to devise, to draft a plan, an evidence-based plan. Then they need to proceed to take effective and immediate action. And finally, they need to publish the outcomes, their solutions. In that regard, we need to come up with a change theory. 4 billion people are now more resilient. And to assess this, we need to use quantitative and qualitative measures in order to analyze the extent of our resilience activities. As far as qualitative measures are concerned, we use them to find out in what ways we are increasing resilience and what are the specific aspects, components that we increase to increase resilience overall, if I may say so again. We basically have quantitative and qualitative metrics, as we can see on the screen. We can see here the different beneficiaries, businesses, countries, cities, natural systems. We understand that the impact on all these systems individually will translate into an overall impact on communities. I would like to also discuss the different attributes of resilience. This is, of course, of great importance for all of you when discussing resilience. We have a group of experts as part of this campaign, and we work hand in hand to organize group sessions. We collaborate with each other, and we have identified together 7 attributes and 19 subcategories that allow us to better understand resilience. I will define each one of them very briefly. So preparedness and planning, the capacity to anticipate, the capacity to devise resilience plans, of course, then the capacity to learn, learning. The capacity to learn deals with, entails learning by experience, learning from past experiences, and also the capacity to learn from workshops, educational programs, to learn from from the contributions of other actors. Agency, what does agency mean? Being able to make decisions independently to increase resilience. And we also have autonomy, the capacity to be autonomous when increasing resilience, leadership, the capacity to take action, and decision making. How communities make decisions to increase resilience. On the other hand, we have social collaboration, the capacity to cooperate, collective participation, and social capital, connectivity, the means of communications that are generated within the system, and networking, the capacity to get in touch with others. Now, equity and inclusivity, whenever there is imbalance in a systems, resilience is not really possible. So we need equity and inclusivity. Now, flexibility, being flexible in the face of challenges, and resources, material resources, financing, technology, infrastructure, social services. All of this also contributes to resilience. Thanks to these attributes, we came up with a map that allows us to know where resilience is being generated, and that way we can provide support to our partners. This is a general map of the campaign, and all partners have a map. They have access to this map, and if they realize that they need to make more efforts on one of these attributes, we can provide support so as to assist them in increasing resilience in that particular factor. Therefore, we insist we provide support for their resilience strategies to be more effective. Last but not least, we are also making sure that the campaign is in line with a wider adaptation agenda. We understand that there has to be cooperation and coordination. We need to incorporate other theoretical concepts. So we are more than willing to cooperate with other actors. I would like to finish my presentation by inviting you all to join the race for a more resilient world. If you have any questions, any concerns, please don't hesitate to send me an email, juanvarela@climatechampions.team, or you can just go onto the campaign's website and find our contact information. We will be more than happy to reply as quickly as we can to answer your questions or concerns. So thank you very much for your invitation. I think this has been a very powerful event. I'm sorry if I didn't cover everything. So again, thank you very much for your invitation.
Gracias, Juan Carlos. So nice to hear your presentation and to learn so much from you. It's really great, and it's so important that we think about these metrics, especially when we're thinking about youth projects, so that we make sure that everyone across civil society, private sector, and governments are all aligned on what that means. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Just before we hand over to our final speaker, just wanted to emphasize one more time, you will be receiving all of this in a follow-up email, as you have been receiving for the past few sessions. If you haven't seen those follow-up emails, please check your spam. Sometimes it's been going into spam. But the optional bonus activity is just to have a conversation with someone in your life. It could be a relative, it could be a neighbor, about what you learned in today's session. And have a conversation and log it on our map. And just remember, when you're logging your conversation, to select youth climate training as part of the campaign that you are participating in. This is completely optional, so you do not need to do it if you would not like to. And just, we are seeing a few messages of people having trouble joining the Slack. It could be just that there's lots of people joining at the same time. So if it doesn't work, try again in just a few hours. We'll send everything in a follow-up email. So thank you so much. I'll hand over to Carlos now.
Thanks, Alexis. And under these lines, please don't forget to scan the QR code of attendance form. Yeah, there we go. Please know that you will have 1 week to watch the recording and log your attendance. We apologize that a few of you had issues last week, as we didn't upload the translated versions on time, but we'll count in attendance of those of you who are watching the translated versions. So yeah, having said that, we're gonna move on to Professor Chukwumerije Okereke. We're very grateful to have you here and excited personally as well. Professor Okereke is Director of the Center for Climate and Development at Alex Ekwueme Federal University. He's also professor his work is devoted to understanding the mix of policies, strategies, and institutional arrangements that can help to address climate change and natural resource degradation in Africa. He's author of several scientific journals and reports on environmental policymaking, including being the coordinating lead author of the IPCC AR6, or the 6th assessment, on interaction and framing chapter. He's also a member of climate frameworks, including the high-level panel of the African Green Innovation. And unfortunately, we won't be able to ask any questions to Professor Okereke because we don't have that much time. But Professor Okereke, the floor is yours. Super grateful to have you and looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so very much. Let me see if I can upload my slide. Can you all see my slides?
Yes.
Good. Well, it will be very unfortunate for me if I don't get questions, because this is supposed to be a two-way traffic where I share some of my thoughts and get the opportunity to hear your thoughts through questions. I will see if I can be brief, but if we cannot make it, you can always reach me with your questions through emailing Alexis, who will be able to channel your questions to me, and I'll be glad to address those in a bilateral way. Now, I want to focus on the issue of adaptation, and specifically what I think you can expect to see at COP28 on this important subject. And I will also see if I can learn some points on some of the actions that the youth can take in order to advocate for more robust action on climate adaptation at COP28. Now, COP28 is the place where we will conclude the first ever global stocktake. Now, the stocktake was mandated by the UNFCCC to get a sense of the extent to which the global community has gone in meeting the objectives of the Paris Agreement. You would know that the Paris Agreement has at least 3 key goals. Number 1 is mitigation. Number 2 is adaptation. But also there is an objective to ensure that finances are aligned, global flow of finances, to help to achieve the first 2 objectives of mitigation and adaptation. But also, of course, there is the issue of loss and damage. So this stocktake will show us how far we have come in the fight against climate change and where more action is needed. However, I have suggested that it's not like anybody needs to wait for COP28 to know what that global stocktake will say. We know that the world is already way off track. I sometimes say that there are 3 key gaps that confront the international climate change. Number 1 is the gap in ambition. Number 2 is the gap in implementation. And number 3 is the gap in equity and justice. So there's a huge gap in these 3 areas, but of course we are focusing mostly on adaptation today. The latest IPCC reports from the AR6 assessment cycle, Working Group 1, Working Group 2, Working Group 3, all paints a very graphic picture of the fact that we are experiencing catastrophic climate risks with high levels and degrees of impact, and that these climate impacts are affecting mostly vulnerable populations around the world. More than 20 million people have been forced out of their residence and homes due to devastating floods since 2008. We have up to 140 million people now living in extreme poverty, most of which have been compounded by climate risks and impacts. We have between 3.3 billion to 3.6 billion people that live in countries that are highly vulnerable to climate impact, and the numbers are increasing. These impacts range from cyclone, other extreme weather events, to famine, hunger, insecurity, species extinction, sea level rise, drought, etc. And so we see that climate change is actually fundamentally an issue of justice, because the distribution of the impact of climate change is such that those who have contributed the least to the problem are bearing the greatest of the burden of climate impact. And some people have argued that the nature of climate injustice is that the rich are shifting their responsibility or externalizing their risks on the poor. You see that countries in developing countries such as South Asia, Central and South America, and Sub-Saharan Africa suffer up to 15 times more deaths from flooding events and drought. So the drought-related mortality between 2010 to 2020 is way higher in poor countries than in rich countries. And some people say that the number may well be higher than this, because in these countries where you have this high rate of mortality, of impact, of vulnerability, they are not really the best in terms of actually measuring data and statistics. I come from Nigeria, for example, and last year, there are 36 states in that country, and we had a flooding event that affected 30 out of the 36 states in the world. Up till now, many of us are still waiting for the government to give us an estimation of the amount of money, of property, lives that are lost. Sometimes we get average estimation only from international organizations such as the Red Cross. And so the number of people that are affected by climate change in developing countries may well be higher than what the statistics tell us today. You look at the top 10 vulnerable countries in the world, you find that many of them, majority of them are actually from least developed countries. Guinea-Bissau, Sierra Leone, South Sudan, etc. These are countries that are already bearing the burden of other types of risks and injustice around, economic injustice around the world. So climate change is actually magnifying the risks and the injustice that is being borne by vulnerable countries. Therefore, I would like to propose that urgent action is needed to enhance action on climate adaptation, and that this needs to be reflected in the focus in the discussions by governments at COP28. But also, we shouldn't only focus our emphasis on the COP. There is need for adaptation action to be mainstreamed in a range of other global governance platforms, such as the G7 and the G20. Now, part of the challenge that we face is that although international negotiations have always said that adaptation and mitigation are at par, at the same level, in reality, mitigation has tended to get more attention than adaptation. And there are many reasons for this. One reason is that some people say that adaptation is a local issue, is a national issue, and that mitigation is a global issue. Of course, we don't agree with that. Adaptation is as much a global issue as mitigation. So here are the 4 key areas where you can expect some fireworks at COP28, and where some of you can direct your energy in advocacy and mobilization. Number 1 is the need for countries to make progress in the operationalization of the global goal on adaptation. Number 2 is the need to ensure predictable funding for adaptation action that is commensurate with the need of developing countries. Number 3 is the need for countries to fast-track the preparation of their national adaptation plans, as well as their national adaptation communication. And finally, there's a need to better understand the adaptation risks and costs globally. When I joined in, the last speaker was also speaking a little bit along these lines. Let me just quickly touch on these 4 issues, and I will see if I have saved any time for a Q&A on it. First, the global goal on adaptation. One of the reasons why we haven't seen much action on adaptation is because there is no clear goal to channel action. We have temperature goals, 1.5, 2 degrees. We can also talk about the quantities of emission But when it comes to adaptation, it's not always clear that there can be a goal. So the African group of negotiators, along with their partners and friends, pushed really hard for a global goal on adaptation to be incorporated in the Paris Agreement, and they were successful. But there has been little progress in actually defining this goal. We made significant progress in COP27 and before then, but there is still a lot of effort. So action on adaptation has continued to lag behind that of mitigation, even as the ambition gap for mitigation also remains quite high. So a key step by parties would be to really ensure that they make progress on the global goal on adaptation. There has already been an establishment of a global goal on adaptation party or kind of framework, but action has really been limited. So we need to move forward in terms of clear metrics. We need to move forward in terms of better information and data to map who is doing what and where there is still gap. Then we need to make progress in terms of the process of really gathering these data and putting them into an analytic framework that can help to drive action. And then we need to make progress on the support. The link between adaptation and temperature goal is one of the things that I think some of you can push really hard on. Since it is clear now that we are missing our temperature goal targets, what does this then mean in terms of our adaptation goal? Should we have an arrangement where the emphasis and the effort in adaptation is calibrated alongside the temperature goal? This will ensure that if we are lagging behind on mitigation, that there are clear consequences in terms of paper actions on adaptation. Maybe there should be the adequacy of adaptation action assessed in this regard. But also there's a need for a better understanding of the source and hard limits to adaptation in different sectors. And some of you might wish to actually call on the parties to establish an IPCC type of report on global goal on adaptation, so that we can get a range, a mosaic, a repertoire of ideas that can help us to strengthen our understanding of this goal and actions towards achieving it. Then on maps, the national adaptation plans, they play an important role in enhancing the understanding and implementation of adaptation actions. They help to improve understanding of the needs of different countries, their priorities, their urgencies, how they can mobilize finance, the capacity building, the technology needs, etc. And when the national adaptation plans are implemented, they can strengthen resilience and help to reduce vulnerability to climate change. But the problem is that we haven't had a lot of progress in this area. Only few countries have actually managed to submit their national adaptation plan. One of the significant challenges is that the developing countries that need to prepare maps are waiting for money to be able to prepare the maps, whereas the rich countries that are coming and say, give me your maps so that I can then bring project, I give you money for projects. So there has to be a reconciliation of how we can put more money into helping countries to prepare maps. Then we have to also deal with the issue of reliability of data. And I also have read quite a number of maps, and I see very limited reporting on social inclusion, on gender issues, on human rights issues, and emphasis remains mostly on the issues that have to do with quantifiable emission reductions and vulnerability assessment. So we need a better systemic monitoring and evaluation of adaptation actions in most sectors. And there remains a lot of gap in terms of clarity and ease to access information on best practices. So parties need to set up a framework where those who are making progress can teach others so that we can learn. The third one is issue of adaptation funding. It is arguably one of the biggest issues. Now, all the assessments out there suggest that developing countries need about 200 billion per annum to deal with adaptation. But currently they are receiving just about 30 billion. significant sums of money continue to go to mitigation, whilst adaptation is ignored. There is need for emphasis on scaling up finances for adaptation and making sure that the global flows of finances are better aligned to support the adaptation need. This does not mean that we should relegate or diminish the money that is going to mitigation. No, but we also have to pay a lot of emphasis on adaptation. The gap is so huge, and if we don't close this gap, that gap is going to increase in future. Because some analysis suggests that by 2050, we need about 1.3 trillion per annum to deal with adaptation. So the funding is urgent. We need to scale up the support for available developing countries to develop their maps. We need to double adaptation funding. Parties have already made an agreement to this, but there's need to keep that agreement. And from doubling adaptation funding, we need to be moving into parity, equality between mitigation and adaptation funding. And we need to ensure that the processes for assessing this money is not too cumbersome or onerous or impossible for poor countries. And so we need to find ways of making adaptation financing more accessible and predictable. And I will leave it at that, hoping that maybe I have saved a few seconds for running. But otherwise, as I said, you can always email me. I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much, Carlos and Alexis, for having me.
Thank you so much to you. And indeed, we have the chance to ask you at least one more question for a moment for such an insightful presentation. So the question is as it follows. Do you think the global stocktake provides a binding mechanism for climate action, especially from global north countries regarding climate justice? And if not, are there plans to create this mechanism? Sorry, you are muted.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, if you think that the global stocktake provides a binding mechanism for climate action, especially in the context of developed countries.
No, the global stocktake does not provide a binding mechanism. And this is the challenge of international negotiation, international multilateral diplomacy. It is very, very hard to get something that is very binding on parties. You know, we live in what we call in international relations, in an anarchical society where there is no supranational power that can enforce these rules. And so we move through persuasion and through what we call software. It's not going to be binding. The most important aim will be to reveal the gaps and, that exist between the goals that we have set and where we currently are. Hoping that those gaps, once revealed, will give the youth and the CSOs and governments a powerful cane, an instrument, a tool to really then call those who are not acting to out and pressure them to do more. It is my hope that in future, if we continue to default, that we can begin to push for some kind of binding mechanisms. It will be difficult in practice, but nothing stops us from making that clarion call in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we actually have a follow-up question if we have time, related to bringing the gap again of finance, because we usually point fingers at the public sector, governments, but what role do you think that the private sector could or should have in meeting this gap?
Significant, because the private sector, many of them are actually the ones that their installations, their facilities are going to be swept away by flood if they don't take action. Imagine, for example, in my country, we have some of the richest oil companies having their facilities in places that are very, very vulnerable to global sea level rise. The challenge, of course, is that funding adaptation or putting money in adaptation doesn't always yield as much money as putting money in mitigation. But there are now increasing pressure for more transparency and clarity by companies and how they are ensuring their businesses and their infrastructure against global climate risks. And so expect to see already, I think next week, there's going to be an announcement in this regard. So banks are going to be looking hard to see where they put their money to ensure that they don't fund something that's going to be swallowed up by hurricane and flood next tomorrow. And so there is huge room for mobilizing private sector funding to support adaptation. The government needs to set a framework, and there can be a lot of instruments to do this, including penalties, voluntary disclosures, etc. But there's so much room for private sector funding to go into adaptation.
Fantastic. I completely agree. And now we can conclude your session and pretty much today's session. But before you leave, folks, thank you very much, Professor Okereke. Please don't forget to share with us how you feel, how you perceived, what you experienced during the session with us through social media. We've got Twitter, LinkedIn, and of course, Instagram, where we'll doing a live session in a few moments. So please join if you can. If not, that's fine. But we'd love to see you, to see your faces as well later. And also, don't forget to get our third session frame. Oh, there we go. Thank you very much. We have a fancy frame for you to share on social media if you want. And also, don't forget to tag us there as well. So, right before we leave, our next session, the fourth session on mitigation, we'll cover the mitigation of emissions of the greenhouse gases. We'll begin by reviewing the structural differences and implications of decarbonization between 3 or 4 regions before examining the importance of domestic processes. We'll also look into the model of just and fair energy transition partnerships in the context of South Africa and how climate justice and energy poverty will play a role in this transition. So thank you very much for today's session, guys, to the panelists, to the funders, to our partners, and to all of the young people that are here and are willing to make a change in the fight against climate change. We'll see you soon.